Murray.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, everyone. How are you all? You know, when we started this trial, we talked about the fact that this is a family thing. I said that in my opening. The family here consisted of Edwin Murray, the father, Sheila, the mother, Michael, Karen, and Sonia. And this was a tightly knit family. They cared about each other. They loved each other. The family was limited as far as financial resources. No doubt about that. That was an issue in this case. When Sheila had a stroke, the family pulled together because they wanted to make sure that she was taken care of. We heard from Sonia when she testified that in the beginning, it was good. In the beginning, it was good. Sonia also said that as far as the caregiving went, there was a hierarchy, okay? What was the hierarchy? The hierarchy was Edwin. And I know you haven't heard his statement, but Edwin, we know from Sonia, is the one who made the decisions. And then it was Michael, and it was Karen, who did what their father wanted them to do. That is the way it worked. That's the way it works in a lot of families. There is one that leads and others that do what they're supposed to do. Now, we know from Sonia's testimony the care was good, and we know that Sheila was a strong-willed woman. We also know that she wanted to stay at home. Now, as time progressed, Sheila's health began to decline. And in early 2018, we know that she went to the hospital. And she was there for about a week. And then she went to rehab at Cornerstone. And she was in rehab for approximately 20 days. At the end of that 20 days, a decision had to be made. Is she going to stay in a facility like this, or is she going to go home? Who made the decision? Edwin made the decision. And yes, my client even said that they were worried, Edwin was worried about finances. How would we pay for that? How would we pay for that? The decision was made by Edwin, and Karen and Michael were there to take care of their mother. Now, Agent Pritchard asked my client, what was the routine? What was a routine day like? Now, this is not necessarily at the end, but this is like maybe when she came home from Cornerstone. What was a day like? We would talk to Sheila. We would communicate with her. We would get her up so that she could use the bedside commode. The sheets on the hospital bed were changed several times a day. She was fed, and she was given liquids, things to drink. The family never left her alone. There was always someone that was there. Either Edwin, the father, Karen, the daughter, or Michael, the son. We also know from Sonia's testimony that my client has some issues. She, in her opinion, he can't even take care of himself. But he was part of the team, taking care of the mother. They were all doing what they could do. And yes, what he was there to do was some of the heavy lifting. That was his role. He took medications that made him sleep, sometimes until noon. And there, you know, when you talk about what one person can do for someone when they don't have any help until maybe midday, that makes things difficult. No doubt about it. It makes things difficult. But the family never left her alone. Miss Romans was a nurse practitioner that would visit approximately every 90 days. And she surveyed the situation. She monitored Sheila's health. She did those tests that was talked about. And she never saw anything that would cause her to want to or required to contact the Adult Protective Services from what she saw. During the time that Miss Romans was visiting, there was the one canceled appointment. And why was that canceled? Karen was not feeling well that day. We know from Miss Romans' testimony that she never spoke to Michael about Sheila, and she never contacted the spouse about Sheila. She never got in touch with Edwin. Sonia has testified, when we talk about this missed appointment, Sonia has testified she met with her mother in February, and she met in July of 2019. She saw her mother, and she stated she did not see anything out of the ordinary. Sonia felt, however, that her mother did not recognize her. Her mother was declining, no doubt about it. But she also said that the family was taking care of Sheila as best they could. You know, I've listened to the testimony of all of these witnesses, just like you all have listened to all of these witnesses. And I have to tell you, in the jury instructions that we received this morning, there are three types of crimes. There's knowingly crimes, there's recklessly crimes, and there's a crime of negligence. I have to tell you, in looking at the legal definitions that you have in those jury instructions, please pay attention to them. Because I think you'll find that with the testimony that we've heard, the proper verdict in this case is not guilty. Not guilty of all offenses. Thank you very much.
Mr. Byrd, we haven't got word yet that lunch is here. You want to get started? I hate to interrupt you during closing or any other attorney, but they're not here yet. No. All right, they're not here yet. So.
That's fine. I don't know if we have any idea about how close they were.
I don't. They're supposed to be, but sometimes it's a little behind.
Okay, that's fine. We can start to pick up later. That's okay. All right. Folks, first thing I want to do, cases like this are never easy for anyone, and I want to thank you for your time and your attention on this. You know, there's never a case like this, no matter what angle you look at it from, that's easy for anyone to deal with. And certainly, I know it's appreciated by all of us that you all came in here, did your civic duty, sat through all this, gave us your time and attention. So just want to let you know that's very much appreciated. What Karen Murray and Michael Murray are guilty of is being poor. Being poor in a country where, at some point, it became normal for families to have to do the kind of calculations that the Murrays had to do. That when it came time that somebody got sick, somebody got old, whenever that showed up at your door and you had to figure out what to do, that it became normal for families to have to scramble to figure out what to do and how they were going to get adequate health care. It became normal for people to have to worry about losing everything that they had, losing their homes, losing, you know, what little bit that they tried to scratch out their whole lives just because somebody had a gall to get sick and get old. At some point, that became normal. Don't know why, don't know who to blame for it, and I wish it weren't that way, but that's the way things are, and that's the situation the Murrays found themselves in. The reality of it is that people like Sheila Murray, people like Tony Murray should have never had to worry about finances, never had to worry about what they were going to do as they got older in terms of being able to have adequate health care. You know, Tony Murray served his country in the Navy and then his community with the Johnson City Police Department. So he wore a uniform for 36 years in service to his community. And his wife for 46 years, Sheila, was even more important because she was a bedrock for a family. She was a foundation for her husband, for 3 children. And they should have never had to worry about being in a position where they have to put their children in a place where their children are going to have to care for them. Their children who don't have the qualifications to do this, with the limited finances, a limited resource, with their children not having the knowledge, the experience to have to take care of their parents as they got up in years, as they declined. But far too many people find themselves in a similar situation. This family should have never been put in a position where it would end up with Tony Murray sitting on the front steps of the family home, sobbing uncontrollably and telling first responders that he was doing the best, that they were doing the best they could with what they had, as his wife is being taken away in an ambulance. And the depths of how far over their heads this family was being demonstrated to him. It's not really surprising that Tony Murray would pass away so soon after his wife, that he passed away 3 months after she did. Between his own health problems and between the grief of, which not hard to imagine that losing your spouse of 46 years would cause a person a tremendous amount of grief. So it's not really surprising that Tony Murray would have passed that soon after his wife. But make no mistake, Tony Murray, if he had lived, would be sitting over there with his children right now. And a very high probability that he would have been charged with this too. But he passed away and he wasn't. So Karen Murray and Michael Murray, what they are not guilty of is knowingly neglecting their mother. What they're not guilty of is murder, not in the first degree, not in the second degree, not in any degree. Dr. Cook talked about the cause of death being homicide. And I want to make sure you're clear about what homicide means. Homicide, the basic definition of it is the death of one person by the actions of another. Now, that doesn't mean that it's intentional. It doesn't mean it's knowing. It doesn't mean necessarily that it's reckless or that it's negligent. Homicide can entail all the way down to something accidental. So know that that's when you see the cause of death being homicide, that doesn't mean that there's intentional action. That doesn't mean that there's knowing action. That's the reason you got all those lesser included offenses that we went through earlier. For example, they all have different definitions of responsibility. Things like criminally negligent homicide, which doesn't even allege intentional or knowing conduct, just that negligence happened. Dr. Cook testified about how the sepsis from broken ankle was the cause of death. And a lot of talk has been at this podium about, what the family knew about this injury, what they didn't know. It has not been shown that this family knew that her ankle was broken, that they knew it before they discovered it and before first responders were called. The family was asked about what happened to this ankle, and they offered a variety of possibilities of this that they didn't know. They said, she had this history of falls. Something could have happened when we were moving her to the commode at some point. We don't know. We've not heard anything to dispute that. That they knew what was happening, that they were covering it up. We've not heard anything that disputes that during the course of these days we've been here and this testimony that we've heard. One of the problems was that Sheila's declining condition, and you heard a lot about that she had been rendered nonverbal, that she was, Dr. Lawson testified about the assessment that was done on her whenever she came in intake, and that she was just one grade above what they would look for in cases of people with traumatic brain injuries or people that are comatose. She wasn't to that, but on the numbers, she was one grade away from that. So it's clear that by this point, she's severely mentally impaired, that her ability to communicate is virtually non-existent. This isn't the case of an able-bodied person that breaks an ankle or sprains an ankle, gets any kind of injury, and that can communicate in some way. I'm hurt. Hey, something's wrong with this. Let's look at this. The unfortunate thing about this is that Sheila had progressed to a point where she couldn't communicate that way anymore. You heard Sonia Henry talk about the condition of her mother's foot, the lipedema. Same thing that you heard Karen talk about. You heard both of them during the course of this. Sonia from the witness stand and Karen with her testimony or her interview with Agent Pritchard. You heard both of them talk about that this was a condition that she'd had for a long time that caused her foot to turn at an angle. But that's the way her foot was generally, and that's what they knew. I mean, you heard Sonia and Karen both talk about that, and that she had a condition where she would swell. She had edema, that her ankles would swell, that she would wear dark socks, I think, in order to help control the swelling that she would have. They didn't realize that anything was different about her ankle. They didn't realize that this bone had worked through the skin until they unwrapped it that day and realized what they were looking at before 911 was called. And I want to clear up something here because the state mischaracterized this in the first open because this was something that came from the witness stand. It's been implied throughout this that either Karen or Michael is the person who called 911, and that's not what happened. Agent Pritchard told you from that witness stand that Tony Murray called. It wasn't one of them. Tony Murray called. Now, why dispatch made the decision to characterize this as a non-emergent call or something that they didn't need to cut lights on, I couldn't tell you. We haven't heard that. Is it possible Tony was in shock? I don't know. But I find it hard to believe that the same Tony Murray who, when first responders got there, was sobbing uncontrollably to the point where they felt like they were going to have to give him medical attention, was somehow nonchalant in calling for help for his wife and her injuries. I have a hard time believing that he was nonchalant, that he didn't appreciate the seriousness of it. So I want to clear up that characterization of this call to 911. State talked about Michael Murray saying that his mother had complained about her foot hurting. And I have to point out that you've repeatedly heard that by this point in time that Sheila Murray was nonverbal. So how could she say that her foot was hurting if she was nonverbal? You heard some testimony, you heard some evidence regarding Michael Murray and some of the mental health issues that he had. I don't know if it played into it or anything, but if you notice in his interview with Agent Pritchard, sometimes it seemed like the two of them were having two different conversations. The Agent Pritchard seemed to constantly have to guide Michael back to what he was trying to ask. And I submit that may have been another case of that, because what has been attributed to Michael as his mother saying that her foot hurt was something that we know from the evidence wasn't possible by that point. And that she didn't spontaneously heal and just suddenly regain the ability to speak and then it go away again. By this point, she couldn't talk anymore. Speaking of Agent Pritchard's interview, he told you the family came in freely and voluntarily, that nobody forced them to come in, they weren't drug in handcuffs, that they were asked to come in to talk about this, and that's what they did. They came in, and as you heard him tell you repeatedly, when asked about things that they said, he said he didn't have any reason to believe that they were being untruthful with him. And I'd remind you that they were being questioned about this roughly 2 weeks after their mother has passed away. And you hear what an important person that Sheila Murray is in their lives, and anybody that's gone through a loss like that can tell you the effect that grief has on a person, especially in those first days, those first weeks. The effect it can have on your ability to remember things, just your emotional state in general. Memory can be different for two people trying to recall the same event. State talked about it in jury selection. They pointed out that about going through and talking about what if two people see things a different way. You saw it to some degree here in this trial, because if you caught it, what paramedic Jenkins and EMT Shelton, how they recalled their encounter with Mrs. Murray, there were some differences in how they remembered it. Not because they were trying to be untruthful, but because memory does that. Two people can see the same event and can remember things different ways. Their recollection, if you heard what they said, their recollection of when Mrs. Murray responded with pain was different. It wasn't the same. That didn't match up. Does that mean that they're lying? Does that mean that they're coming up here and trying to mislead you? No. It just means that memory can be misleading. We talked about in the beginning about the importance, taking notes, about a short pencil beats a long memory. And that's why, because memory is fallible. Sheila Murray, you heard a great deal about her advancing dementia, the effects of multiple strokes. As I said earlier, it's clear that she was very impaired by this point. That's not her fault. Nobody asked for that. Nobody asked for that sort of thing to happen to them. But that's the condition that she was in. And her decline was gradual. That it went from the time she went into Cornerstone, when the family realized something severe had happened, something drastic had happened, and quickly took action when they realized it. She goes to Cornerstone, she gets out, she comes home, and then it's a slow decline. And you can see it in those records that Tracy Romans produced. You can see it. From what Sonia Henry talked about with her mother. This slow decline. You're watching this person that you know slowly be erased because of what has happened to her mind. And this was a situation this family was not prepared to handle. They were not prepared to handle what was going to happen with Sheila Murray. They were not equipped for the severity of where this was going to go. They made their decision, based on financial needs, but at some point, as I said in the opening, there was a time when whatever limited ability that this family had, with the limited resources they had, there came a point, a day, a minute, somewhere, where that line was crossed, where they could no longer care for this woman the way she needed. And they didn't even know it. They didn't even know when they crossed that line. Because they're there day in and day out. Those of you that are parents, maybe sometimes you can look at a picture of your child from a few years ago and it's startling to see how much they've grown. Because the day in and day out changes. It's easy to miss as you go along. And that's what's apparent here, is that Sheila's declining little by little. Physically, mentally, she's declining little by little until there came a point where this family wasn't capable of taking care of her anymore, and they didn't even know it until it was too late. And Karen Murray didn't, and Michael really, but both of these children didn't really have any kind of choice in terms of what was going to go on with their mother, in terms of where she was going to go. It's been implied to a degree that Karen had some kind of say-so over the decision to bring her mother home. But I think you've heard from the witness stand, you've heard the evidence, that's not true. That your opinion counted in that house so long as it agreed with Dad's. As long as it agreed with Tony Murray's opinion, that's the only time your opinion really counted, because he had his mind made up about what he was going to do, what he believed was best, and that's what was going to happen. Tony Murray was the one responsible for his wife. I mean, that's speaking of common sense, I mean, that's common sense. You know, that's medical facilities, insurance, all that. They're going to want somebody's name to be considered the person that makes decisions about these things. That's Tony Murray, and you haven't been shown anything different. No matter how much we imply that somehow Karen had some say over it, that's not reality. If there was something out there, if there was something that said Karen Murray is the decision maker here, you better believe it would have been put out there on that witness stand. Somebody would have come in and talked about it, but you didn't see that. Because the reality of it, Tony Murray was a decision maker in that home. Sonia, the third child, she told you that she had reservations about this scenario from the beginning. That from the very beginning, she didn't believe that they would have the capability of taking care of their mother. That she, fought with her dad over it. But Dad's word is what went. And it didn't matter what brother and sister think. That Dad, this is what he wants to do. Sonia said she wanted to take her down to Chattanooga with her. And Dad didn't want to do that. He wanted to take care of her at home. But to say that Sonia had no reservations about the ability of her brother, sister, and father to take care of her mother is not correct. Because that's not what she testified to. What she testified to is from the beginning she had the reservations. And those reservations remained throughout the time until the end of her mother's life, because she recognized that they were not going to have the ability to handle this. They didn't have the resources or the ability, that she needed a higher level of care. But like her siblings, Sonia's voice wasn't what counted. It was only what her father wanted, was the only decision that was going to be made. And it's not because Tony Murray was malicious. There's not been any proof or any sort of indication that Tony anything but loved his wife and was trying to do right by her. And the proof would show that at the time she came home from Cornerstone, the decision was made to bring her home because that's where she was most comfortable. She was still able to get around, to feed herself to a degree, to walk with a walker. At that time, it seemed like it was okay, that they could make this work, and that she could come home to where she was the most comfortable, where she had spent her life, where she had built this life with her husband, with her children. And her children loved her. All three of her children. Karen, Michael, and Sonia, all. I think it's clear. Loved their mother then, love their mother now. And in that house, you grew up, you heard testimony about how much Sonia talked about her mother for all the good things, what a great cook she was, and how funny she was. She was strict. And I'm guessing her dad, I'm guessing a Navy man, 26-year police officer, I'm guessing he was probably a little strict too. So in that household, when your parents told you to do something, you did it. You didn't question it, you did it, because that's what's instilled in you. That you listen to your parents and you do what they say. And you try to do the best that you can for your family. And that's what Karen was trying to do. Karen Murray was trying to do in this case. She was trying to do the best for her family with what she had, even though she didn't have the knowledge, even though she might have had her own reservations about this situation. Her dad wanted this to happen, and she wanted to do her best to make her dad happy, to abide by what he wanted, and to try to take care of her mother. And that's what she tried to do. And throughout it, she did what her father said that day when the paramedics were there. We did the best we could with what we had. And that's what Karen did throughout the course of events. And for a time, everything was okay. And you see that from the records. Contrary to the characterization that she only turned her mother over once or twice, it looks like for the better part of a year and a half that Karen Murray was doing all right, that she was at least adequate at it. If we're to believe Miss Roman's records, then it would appear there weren't any concerns to this, that Karen Murray being tasked with figuring out how to do this, that she was doing all right. She was doing an adequate job, even without the knowledge of this, even without a great amount of help. As you heard, her father had a variety of health issues. He was the only source of income in the house. And besides that, he had the kidney issues that ended up taking his life. He had heart disease, back issues, a variety of things where his ability to help with Sheila was limited. And her brother, you heard some evidence regarding his mental health issues and his inability to be available a good part of the day because of the medication that he took, that he slept. So there's a lot of time that Karen's on her own. That if she needs to lift her mom, she needs to move her mom around, she doesn't have anybody to help her do that. She has to figure out how to manage that. She has to figure out how to get around that. She has to figure that out as her mother's declining, as you're going through time. She's having to figure out how to do this, how to try to get around the help that is unreliable, not through malice, not because Tony or not because Michael don't care, but because they've got their own health issues. But Karen's here having to try to figure out how to manage this. This wasn't like a hospital where you can push a button and you've got a host of people that will come in who are trained at doing something and are there whenever you need. This isn't like that. If somebody needs to be moved in a hospital or a nursing home, you get your CNAs, orderlies, whatever they want to call them. You get in nurses. You always have people there to do that. That's not what the case was in this home. We'll take a moment. I'm going to come back to that for a moment. I want to take a moment to talk about some of the things from Agent Pritchard's interview. He talked about there not being any photos taken at the scene, and I know he gave us an explanation for why. But I can't help but point out that there was never an attempt to go to the scene to see if there was anything, if there's anything that his eyes might have seen that somebody else's might not have seen. It's easy to sit here and call people liars and say you didn't do this, you didn't do that, without anybody having any proof of it, without anybody taking pictures of anything, anybody looking at anything. What if you go to the home and the bed didn't go anywhere? We haven't seen any of those things for all the talk about this stuff. We didn't see any sort of photographic proof of things as they were at the time, not from Johnson City Police. I know the TBI wasn't involved, but nobody thought to take pictures at any point. Nobody went back to look at anything. Nobody went back to look and see, hey, maybe we can find the gauze that they say was wrapped around her ankle. Maybe we should look to see. Maybe it's not there. Maybe we should go look. Maybe we can look and see. Does it look like they actually bothered to change bed linens? Does it look like there's anything here that they used to treat her? What does it actually look like here? Maybe they find nothing. Maybe it's true. Maybe there is no scene to photograph or to look at. But we don't know. They never bothered to go look. So that robs us of some ability to actually see with our own eyes, not rely on the fallibility of memory, what things look like in that house. He didn't look further into when he started to hear something about Michael and the medications he took, didn't look into that. Seems like it'd be relevant to see if you're going to say people are neglectful or not taking care of someone, to look into what kind of medications they might be taking, what might affect them, their ability to take care of someone. Seems like that might be relevant. But again, it's something that wasn't examined. I take issue with it because I think it's hard to sit here and say that somebody's not being truthful when you've not done your own digging to see, what they're saying. Or can I go out and verify this? Can I go out and look with my own eyes and verify whether or not there's anything that corroborates this or doesn't? Now, getting back to the time period when Karen Murray is tasked essentially as the person that has to figure out her mother's care. You can tell Miss Murray's not a physically imposing woman. She didn't have the strength to lift her mother on her own. She had to rely, as I said before, on her father and her dad whenever they were available, and she was trying to do right by her family to the best that she knew how. She, as you heard from her discussions with Agent Pritchard, she thought she was giving adequate care for her mother. As she characterized, it was stupid of me to think I could do this myself. I thought I could do it, but I was stupid to think that. And that's hindsight. And again, I talked about hindsight in the opening, about how hindsight is applying information from after the fact to people that didn't have the information at the time. You hear from her conversation with Agent Pritchard that she realized, I'm sure she realized that.
Sheila Murray and her husband, Edwin Tony.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, where I left off, I was talking about the progression in this case of the care of Sheila Murray. What I want to talk about is how Karen Murray, as the evidence has indicated, I talked about before we broke, Karen Murray for a while appeared to be doing all right and taking care of her mother, and that's what the records indicate. What's the evidence show in this case? That between Tracy Roman's February 2018 visit to Sonia Henry's July 2019 visit, just a few weeks before the events that led us here, there were no concerns about the care of Sheila Murray. Nobody seemed to have any worry about that. Miss Roman's from the view of a nurse practitioner, and Miss Henry from the view of a daughter. They came in, saw nothing of a concern. She looked to be being cared for adequately, even though everybody noticed, and you heard that from Miss Henry, from Miss Romans both, that again her decline was ongoing. This gradual decline just kept on going, and anybody that's dealt with dementia knows dementia doesn't get better. It's the mental impairment, the physical impairments that often come with it, I mean, that doesn't get better. Very rare that you have somebody that's had multiple strokes that's going to get better from that either. Sonia Henry talked about in February 2019, she came to visit her mother for her birthday, and that even by that point, her mother looked frail, looked like she lost a lot of weight, that she was having trouble eating. She'd become nonverbal by that point. And I point out that that is before Tracy Roman's last visit, that when Sonia came up and saw her mother, she commented on the state of her, that she wasn't worried necessarily about the condition that she was in, but she couldn't help noticing that her mother looked like she was frail. And with all the multitude of problems that she had, I suppose that's to be expected. But I bring that up to counter this idea that she wasn't being fed, that nobody was trying to give her any kind of nourishment. Just due to the progression of the disease, the conditions that she suffered from, it was becoming harder and harder and harder to get her to take nourishment. To be honest, I wasn't clear exactly what it was that Ms. Romans came in the home and did for Ms. Murray, but she documented these things. I don't know, it sounded to me as though she came in and she checked on certain things, kind of went through, I guess, a checklist of what she was looking for and generated a report about her condition, and then, was waiting for the next visit. I mean, she certainly wasn't concerned, she said, at any point with the condition that Mrs. Murray was in, that she would have called Adult Protective Services if she was. I want to clarify something else, too, that I heard about in the state's first close about this. Ms. Romans didn't come every 3 months. She came in February of 2018, in March of 2018, in April of 2018, and then there was a gap to December of 2018, then on to March. So it wasn't like she was on a 90-day window where she was coming back. It wasn't unheard of for there to be a gap in time that she came. And as she said, that gap between April and between December, she didn't see anything that was of a concern to her whenever she came back. The state's implied to some degree that there's something about Karen Murray canceling that June visit that is somehow, I don't know if it's supposed to be nefarious or it's supposed to be something, why it is that's supposed to be such a key thing here that she canceled that visit, as though Karen Murray's not allowed to get sick herself, that she's not allowed to do that. And she didn't reschedule the visit, and we've heard that. But in terms of the condition of her mother, her sister visits a few weeks later. And again, sees her mother, sees nothing about her condition that alarms her. So there's nothing about her missing that appointment in June that has any indication that there was something wrong, that she was trying to hide something or anything of that nature, because her sister saw her a couple weeks later and said she looked normal. She looked like there was nothing out of the ordinary there. Now, the idea that Ms. Romans would just come out whenever, there's something she said that I want to draw your attention to there, that she could just come whenever you call. What did she say whenever they talked about decisions of her care in the home? When she talked to Karen, Karen was her only point of contact. What did she say? I have to talk to my dad about it. I have to see what my dad says about it. Again, we circle back to that same thing where Tony Murray is the decision maker here. That there wasn't some unlimited access of care. I mean, the truth is, and everybody knows this, like, insurance has limits on what it's going to pay. I mean, that's not, you talk about common sense. I mean, precious few people have unlimited access to care. And if this family had that, I'm sure we would have seen something to that degree. But again, what Ms. Romans told you, the same thing you heard over and over again, the decisions on what to do went to Tony. That even if Karen thought something needed to be done, it had to go through Tony first, because Tony's the source of income in the house. He's the decision maker in the house. Doesn't matter what Karen thinks she needs. If Dad doesn't think they can afford it, doesn't think she needs it, it's not going to happen. So I ask you this, though. I'm talking about the scope of time here, the timeline we're talking about, just what we've heard about here in this case, from January, February of 2018 to July 2019, and between the Sonia Henry's visit in July 2019 to just 4 or 5 weeks later, July 4th, about the second week of August. Is it reasonable to believe that somewhere in all that time, in that 4 or 5 weeks, that Karen Murray or her brother just suddenly stopped caring about their mom, just suddenly stopped loving their mom, that they went from the situation where the records indicate that she was being taken care of, at least adequately? It wasn't a concern. It wasn't something we go call Adult Protective Services about. Is it somehow reasonable to believe that in that few weeks, they suddenly just decided, let's just let it go. We don't care anymore. We're not going to take care of Mom anymore. We're just going to let it go. I would submit to you that it is not. So what do you do when you're in a situation like Karen Murray was? You try to do the best you can with what you have. Now, Karen Murray, as you've heard, and her brother, neither one had any more than a basic knowledge of how to care for their mother. And as problems advanced, as Sheila Murray's condition declined, as those problems got worse, it went from something that they could handle to something that they could not handle. You heard some talk about Miss Roman saying her advice regarding bed sores. And all I heard her say was that Karen Murray supposedly received from this. That's not what you heard. Now, you heard a lot, of course, from medical professionals in this case, and it was clear, I think, from just about everybody that testified, that they could spot problems quickly, big and small. They could spot problems. They knew to recognize what a problem was. They could recognize the course of it, how severe that a problem could get, what needed to be done. Problem, how to remedy that, and what resources are necessary to make that happen. Now, that's the comparison that I was pointing out in the beginning and opening and all that, compared to what the Murrays and specifically Karen had. Karen doesn't have that knowledge. Karen doesn't know these advanced things that these medical professionals know. When these problems come up, does she even know what the problem is? Does she know what the severity of a problem is? Does she know what needs to be done about it? Does she know what resources are necessary for it? Does she even know the questions to ask? Because I know the state would say, well, she could call somebody or something, but if you don't even know the questions to ask, then what are you supposed to do? Who are you supposed to do that? Who's supposed to tell you what the questions are? You heard, for example, Dr. Cook talk about hospitals and nursing homes having the pads present and available for bed sores. That's just common practice. That's just what they do. Because they know, through their knowledge, through their education, through their experience, what can happen when bed sores go untreated for a long time. You know, these places have to deal with the liability from that thing. So, of course, they're going to be on the ball about it. Of course, they're going to, not only from what they know, but just because they don't want it to be some liability issue. They're going to try to take care of that as quickly as they can. But that's because they know what can happen if these things go untreated. And as Karen said, I didn't know that this could be something that was life-threatening. She didn't have that knowledge. You talk about her mother's contractures and what had started to occur to Sheila as she got older and when her arms started to draw up. What do you do when you're in that situation and you're Karen Murray? You heard paramedic Jenkins talk about whenever he came to the scene and found her arms the way they were, that he didn't want to pull them away from her because he was afraid he would hurt her. Now that's a complete stranger who sees that situation and sees how tight her arms are, how stiff her arms are, and he doesn't want to hurt her. That's a complete stranger to him. He doesn't know her. What are you doing after your own mother? What do you do when you've got a person who you love, you're here in the family home where you grew up, where you have memories of this person, you know, when you were a child, memories you have with them, the food she put on the table, laughs you had, things you had together, and then you see this person here that you love and that you care about. What do you do when you've got a situation like that when a person's arms are drawn up? If a complete stranger won't pull those arms away because he's afraid of hurting, what do you think somebody's firstborn child's going to do? What's reasonable to believe that they will do? If you're a layperson and you don't know and you don't understand that leaving her alone in that situation and not doing something about those arms, that you don't understand what it might lead to, like the injury that occurred to her right breast where, as you heard Dr. Cook talk about, it was essentially pinned under those arms as they were contracted up. If you don't understand, if all you're trying to do is to make your mother comfortable and you don't want to add to her pain, but you don't understand that what you're doing is going to make matters worse, then how do you fix that? What do you do about that? How do you do that with your own mother when you're just trying to make her comfortable? But by your own ignorance of what can happen with these things, you end up making things worse. Not through malice, not because you want to, but just because you don't want to hurt her. You don't want to cause her more pain. And you're there in the moment, day after day, and you're trying to make your mother comfortable, even as she's declining. You know, the states talk some about, you know, rehabilitation and physical therapy. Again, those are things that cost money. Those are things that are going to have to run through Dad. Those are things that Tony Murray's going to have to decide. Karen doesn't have a say in that. Michael doesn't have a say in that. That's Dad's department. I'm going to talk about, along the same lines, when you talk about repositioning Sheila. You heard Karen Murray talk to Agent Pritchard about how hard it was to move her mother, that she'd gotten stiff, and that she tried to roll her over, but her mother would continue to roll back to the same side. That she'd try to roll her over, and she'd continue to roll back. And then she'd try to keep her from rolling over, but she'd just keep going back to the same place. What do you do when your own mother is fighting you? When you're doing what you think is the right thing, but she continues to fight you, and you're there in the moment, day after day, and all you want to do is make her comfortable. And she keeps rolling back to this position because it seems like it makes her comfortable. What do you do when you're her? Do you keep fighting your own mother? Do you keep forcing her to do things? Which might be a little easier if she was in a nursing home, because they could do that. They know, number one, that it's necessary to do that. It's necessary to reposition a person. But number two, they're not dealing with their own mother. They're not dealing with the prospect and the fear of hurting their own mother. And again, it's something that by trying to make your mom more comfortable, you end up causing problems you don't even realize are going to happen because you don't know any better. You don't know the extent of how those problems how far those problems can go. You're trying to, there in the moment, trying to make her feel better, trying to make her comfortable because she seems to want to lay in this position, but you don't realize that you're making things worse. What do you do? You know, your mother gets to the point where she won't eat. You have to fight her. You heard the paramedics talk about she fought them when they were trying to put oxygen on her. So you're there with her day after day, and she's fighting you when you try to feed her. Some days she won't eat. You heard that, and Sonia talked about that, said that during the time she would talk to Karen that there would be conversations where she would say, you know, Mom didn't eat today. All I could do is get her to drink today. You're having to fight her all the time to try to give her the care, what little degree you know how to give her, and you're having to fight her the whole time. What do you do when you're in that situation? And Dr. Lawson talked about what happens at a hospital when that occurs, that they move a person to palliative care or comfort care. I mean, that's not end-of-life care, but, you know, it's certainly a degree more where where it's literally what it says, you're trying to make someone comfortable. They know that, and they know how to do that. They recognize that. What do you do when you're at home with your mother and she won't eat? Like what Karen told Agent Pritchard. Do you pry her jaws open? Do you force her to eat? How do you do that? And the truth is, as unpleasant as it is to consider the context of it, the fact that she had, you know, that when the paramedics came out to the scene, that she had a diaper that had feces in it, that had urine in it, it would indicate that to some degree she was getting nourishment, because she wouldn't have those things if she wasn't getting some kind of nourishment. What do you do when your father, who you love and you respect, steadfastly refuses to put your mother in a nursing home? You know, and you heard Sonia talk about the continuing conversations about that, and he was adamant about not putting her in a nursing home because he's worried that if he does that and that house goes up as collateral, that house is going to be the next one on the block that's vacant. What do you do when that's in your dad's head? How do you convince him otherwise? If that's part of trying to protect your mother by, dad won't do what I think she needs, so in part of protecting it, what do? Call the cops on your dad? You have somebody that wore the same uniform as him for 26 years come and haul him away? What's that going to fix? Because now your financial situation has gotten much worse. As the only person with any kind of financial income there, the only person bringing in money is out of the picture now. Mom's not suddenly getting better. You don't win the lottery whenever you do that. Somebody's got to pay the bills. Somebody's got to pay for that insurance that your dad's already wrestling with to try to get care for. You don't pay that insurance, eventually they're going to have no sympathy or hesitation for cutting you off. Eventually your mom ends up a ward of the state, and now that house is squarely the exact thing that your dad didn't want to happen is the exact situation that you're in, where that house is now squarely in the sights of satisfying whatever debt that your mother's care runs up as a ward of the state. And these are all things it's not clear Karen had any idea that she would know what happened. For a family as close-knit as this to do something like, you know, calling the police on your dad or reporting him or something would be unthinkable. And it's not realistic when what we know about the family. But when the decision maker in the house, when they won't budge, what do you do? What do you do? You try to make the best of the situation. The friction that's there between what you want to do to try to take care of your mother and what you're trying to do to appease your father and what he wants, you try to do the best you can with what you have. And that's what Karen Marie was trying to do. It has been controverted in here that Karen loved her mother. And again, the records show that she was trying to take care of her mother the best that she could, with the very limited knowledge, the very limited resources that she had, in a situation where her voice and her opinion didn't matter. So what do? For a while it was good enough, until that line got crossed and it wasn't anymore. And you don't even know you've crossed it. You don't even know the day has come when what you're capable of is no longer good enough. Again, is it reasonable to believe that somewhere between July 4th of 2019 and the second week of August 2019, that after all this time and after all this effort that she put into trying to take care of her mother the best she could, that she suddenly just stopped caring, that she suddenly stopped loving her mother? Is that reasonable to believe that that's what happened? You heard her sister say that she didn't think that any of her family members, if they'd known about the condition of that ankle, that they wouldn't have done something about it immediately. And for everything else you've heard, there's nothing that's been put in here that says they knew about it, that they knew the condition of that ankle, that they had reason to know that that ankle was broken and that she was just laying there like that. No matter how much the state tries to say otherwise, there's been no proof put on to show that they knew about that they knew that's what was happening to her. and that they just let her lay there like that. Because as soon as they realized the severity of it, they called for help. With regards to her laying there in when they found her in this diaper, that's this full diaper, as you've heard about, something that Michael Murray said about to Agent Pritchard when he was talking about that. He said they got her up to change her, realized what was going on with the ankle. They realized this and laid her back down on the bed because they didn't think they could clean her up. So the reason they found her laying on a bed in a full diaper is because they didn't think they could clean her. After they realized what was going on with this ankle, they laid her back down. That's why she's laying there in a full diaper. They realized she needed to be changed. They were attempting to, and that's when they saw the ankle. They laid her back down because they didn't think they could clean her after they saw what they saw. Dr. Cook talked about the pressure sores on Sheila Murray's buttock and something akin to diaper rash in her genital region. She said that the pressure sores on her buttock were in the beginning stages. And y'all heard the same thing I did. And that this diaper rash was not advanced, that it was something like what a child would experience. And those of you with children know how quickly diaper rash can occur. Literally in a few hours, a child can develop diaper rash. So contrary to this implication that Sheila Murray laid in her own filth for days, then why doesn't that show in what they found when in the region that diaper would have been? Why do we have pressure sores that, as you've heard, can begin very quickly, even in places where you're getting professional care? Bed sores can happen fast. You find one that's in the beginning stages, not one that's advanced. You find diaper rash, which can develop very quickly. She wasn't laying there for days in her own filth, or this stuff would have been more advanced, and there would have been proof of that. This all circles back to what I said in the beginning, that this case comes down to what you believe about the term knowingly neglect. Now, I know willful is added into that, but as you saw, the definition of willful is voluntarily and knowingly, so it's kind of a repetitive term there. But I'll address the both of them. And the state has not proven that knowing neglect has been there. Even if you feel that they've shown a legal definition of neglect, they've not shown that either of these two knowingly neglected their mother. They haven't shown that. Not beyond a reasonable doubt, certainly. We talk about a person acting knowingly with respect to the result of the person's conduct. A person is aware the conduct's reasonably certain to cause a result. Have they shown that about either one of these two? No, they haven't. They haven't shown that either one of these two beyond a reasonable doubt. They failed to show that anything that you want to call neglect was done to her knowingly. What it shows is this is a poor family that was over its head. That's what they are. That's what they were. They ran over their head the situation. Their mother declined beyond what they were capable of handling. And they didn't even know it. They didn't know. No, it does not. The proof is shown in this case that the state is not able to show you beyond a reasonable doubt that they're not able to meet their burden with regard to the element of knowing, that they've not been able to do that. And where that leaves us, folks, is that the right choice, the only choice for you as a jury, is to find these defendants not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bard. Mr. Donaldson, you ready for statements on behalf of Mr. Michael Murray?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, everyone. How are you all? When we started this trial, we talked about the fact that this is a family thing. I said that in my opening. The family here consisted of Edwin Murray, the father, Sheila, the mother, Michael, Karen, and Sonia. And this was a tightly knit family. They cared about each other. They loved each other. The family was limited as far as financial resources. No doubt about that. That was an issue in this case. When Sheila had a stroke, the family pulled together because they wanted to make sure that she was taken care of. We heard from Sonia when she testified that in the beginning, it was good. In the beginning, it was good. Sonia also said that as far as the caregiving went, there was a hierarchy, okay? What was the hierarchy? The hierarchy was Edwin. And I know you haven't heard his statement, but Edwin, we know from Sonia, is the one who made the decisions. And then it was Michael, and it was Karen, who did what their father wanted them to do. That is the way it worked. That's the way it works in a lot of families. There is one that leads and others that do what they're supposed to do. Now, We know from Sonia's testimony the care was good, and we know that Sheila was a strong-willed woman. We also know that she wanted to stay at home. Now, as time progressed, Sheila's health began to decline. And in early 2018, we know that she went to the hospital, and she was there for about a week. And then she went to rehab at Cornerstone, and she was in rehab for approximately 20 days. At the end of that 20 days, a decision had to be made. Is she going to stay in a facility like this, or is she going to go home? Who made the decision? What was a routine day like? Now, this is not necessarily at the end, but this is like maybe when she came home from Cornerstone. What was a day like? We would talk to Sheila. We would communicate with her. We would get her up so that she could use the bedside commode. The sheets on the hospital bed were changed several times a day. She was fed, and she was given liquids, things to drink. The family never left her alone. There was always someone that was there. Either Edwin, the father, Karen, the daughter, or Michael, the son. We also know from Sonia's testimony that my client has some issues. She, in her opinion, he can't even take care of himself. But he was part of the team, taking care of the mother. They were all doing what they could do. And yes, what he was there to do was some of the heavy lifting. That was his role. He took medications that made him sleep, sometimes until noon. And there, when you talk about what one person can do for someone when they don't have any help until maybe midday, that makes things difficult. No doubt about it. It makes things difficult. But the family never left her alone. Miss Romans was a nurse practitioner that would visit approximately every 90 days. And she surveyed the situation. She monitored Sheila's health. She did those tests that was talked about. And she never saw anything that would cause her to want to or required to contact the Adult Protective Services from what she saw. During the time that Miss Romans was visiting, there was the one canceled appointment. And why was that canceled? Karen was not feeling well that day. We know from Miss Romans' testimony that she never spoke to Michael about Sheila, and she never contacted the spouse about Sheila. She never got in touch with Edwin. Sonia has testified, when we talk about this missed appointment, Sonia has testified she met with her mother in February, and she met in July of 2019. She saw her mother, and she stated she did not see anything out of the ordinary. Sonia felt, however, that her mother did not recognize her. Her mother was declining, no doubt about it. But she also said that the family was taking care of Sheila as best they could. You know, I've listened to the testimony of all of these witnesses, just like you all have listened to all of these witnesses. And I have to tell you, in the jury instructions that we received this morning, there are 3 types of crimes. There's knowingly crimes, there's recklessly crimes, and there's a crime of negligence. I have to tell you, in looking at the legal definitions that you have in those jury instructions, please pay attention to them, because I think you'll find that with the testimony that we've heard, the proper verdict in this case is not guilty. Not guilty of all offenses. Thank you very much.
Mr. Byrd, we haven't got more yet that lunch is here.